There's a common perception that democracy ends with a battle, soldiers in the streets, a coup d'etat, the fall of a government.
But we know that democracy can be lost one little step at a time.
We've reported on it and lived through it. And when we look at America today, right now, we see a place where the slide to autocracy has already begun.
It's not some distant future, it's the present.
I'm Ann Applebaum, a staff writer at The Atlantic.
I'm Peter Pomerantsev, a senior fellow at the SNF Agora Institute at Johns Hopkins University.
We're the hosts of a new podcast from The Atlantic, Autocracy in America.
Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts.
There's the childish nicknames, the crazy conspiracy theories, this weird obsession with crowd sizes.
The sight last week at the Democratic National Convention of Barack Obama, the dignified statesman and 44th president of the United States, up on stage, looking down at his two hands as he made a joke about Trump's size.
It just goes on and on and on.
That was a revelation to me. In 2016, as Donald Trump was doling out belittling nicknames and insults, Michelle Obama famously told her fellow Democrats, when they go low, we go high. And then in the last month, it's like a whisper campaign went out among Democrats. Climb on down. Just say it. Say on a national stage that thing that you've been saying to your friends. Michelle?
Who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
In fact, if you want to, you can even rhyme it, Bill.
He mostly talks about himself. So the next time you hear him, don't count the lies. Count the eyes.
It's not that politicians haven't insulted each other for centuries. They do, and they have. Some insults stick, some don't. It's part of the game. But with the exception of Trump, I've never seen a political strategy of insults dominate an entire party and take off so thoroughly and quickly and gleefully. It's like ever since Democratic vice presidential candidate Tim Walz said the word weird, Trump is weird, J.D. Vance is weird, their policies are weird, a door opened up and Democrats rushed right through it. Now, in other countries that deal with authoritarian leaders, mockery is a known strategy, a way of deflating a leader's too big ego. It can be really effective, also possibly dangerous, and of course, it can backfire. Here in the U.S., though, it's something we haven't fully explored yet. So today is a two-part show. First, we'll talk to Atlantic staff writer David Graham, who is at the convention and covers Trump, and so is the perfect person to help us dissect the politics of mockery, where they came from, how they might roll out in the next few months, and how they can go wrong. And then, it turns out there's a surprising muse for the new dump on Trump approach. He's a conservative who's written for The Atlantic, George Conway. He used to be married to Trump campaign manager Kellyanne Conway, and during his years of observing his ex-wife's boss, he gathered an arsenal of insights about how to make fun of Trump in a way that gets under his skin. And he tried them out before anyone else was doing it.
The best way to hit the soft underbelly of his psychological disorders is to mock him. He cannot take mockery. It is the thing that makes him craziest. And the mockery diminishes him. It makes him look weak. And that's, the reason why his followers follow him is they think he is a strong man. And he is not.
These days, Conway is looking prescient. But before we hear from him, I want to understand how Democrats are using this new strategy and what it might do for their chances in November. With me to explain is staff writer David Graham. Hey, David.
Hello.
Hi. So in 2016, as you know, Michelle Obama famously declared, where they go low, we go high. We all know that lately we're in a we go low moment. And I have found it just fascinating to watch just anthropologically how this line coalesced and became so effective in what seems to be instantaneously. I'm curious as a political reporter what you've seen.
I think maybe just going high kind of ran out of usefulness. Mm-hmm. I think it worked for a while. It didn't maybe work in 2016 for Democrats. They lost that election. But in 2020, you had Joe Biden, going out with this kind of soul of America, John Meacham written speeches thing, which I think was a variation on that. Mm-hmm. Very high-minded and lofty rhetoric, and we're going to save the soul of the nation stuff. Mm-hmm. And that worked. And then at some point, people got sick of it. It sort of lost its novelty. And suddenly you see Democrats ready to throw some punches, and that seems to be working for them now.
Was it a spontaneous occurrence that just happened when the word weird came out of Tim Walz's mouth? Or do you get a sense it was more of an orchestrated campaign?
I think there's a little bit of both. I mean, Walz clearly hit on something with weird. And it was interesting, even you could see him sort of developing it over a series of TV hits and recognizing that it was working and then being like, oh, I'm going to do that, push that button more. But I think even outside of that, kind of from the moment that Biden stepped down, you saw, the nascent Harris campaign taking a little bit more aggressive approach and being less like, we're going to stand back, we're going to tell you about how important the stakes are with a very deep voice, and more like, yeah, let's bring it. Like, let's go. Let's mix this up. And so I think those things are all kind of connected and they've coalesced into form a sort of go low strategy, I guess. I mean, what blew me away, and this sort of gets to the kind of shift, I think, is the back-to-back speeches by the Obamas at the DNC, because they had been so much the avatars of this, it was Michelle Obama who used that phrase in the first place. And, they're very dignified. They try to sort of stay above the fray. And so Michelle comes in and gives, one of the hotter political speeches I think I've ever witnessed live. And, throws some punches in that one, talks about not expecting things to be given to us sort of stuff. And then Barack Obama comes up after that and makes, I'm not even sure how I can refer to this, makes an unsubtle joke about Trump's manhood.
Yes, that was good. That was good. Good job there. Manhood. I like it. Very 19th century. Yeah.
Yeah. And of all the people to say that, like Barack Obama, he's a funny guy, but man, I almost couldn't believe it. So that's the one that sticks with me.
You know what was astonishing to me about that moment? It's not, I did believe that probably when Michelle and Barack talk to each other, they talk like this. In the same way sort of people talk like this. It's not that you've never heard Trump referenced or described in these ways. It's just the out loud in an official proceeding. It was the saying out loud of things that, people normally just say to their friends. That's the breach that I was curious about. Like, how did everyone decide this is politically acceptable to say in public?
Right, totally. Well, I think also there's, Democrats either intentionally or unintentionally coupled the idea that, democracy is important and there have to be guardrails and there have to be rules to the idea that also you can't say mean things. And I think what we're seeing from them now is you can actually decouple those things. You can talk about democracy being important. You can talk about guardrails, but it doesn't mean you can't also ridicule Trump.
Yes. And in fact, I noticed that it was an order of operations, that the mockery would come first and then, but to be sure, we should take him seriously, Yeah.
A spoonful of mockery makes the medicine go down or whatever.
Yeah, something like that. Now, I have been reading, at least back to 2020, maybe 2015, there are often an op-ed or two, often from people who are either from other countries or have experience reporting in other countries that say, mock the dictator. Like dictators are deflatable. Like in general, one thing I have learned from living/reporting overseas is that dictators have big egos and you just have to puncture them. And then they quote George Orwell, who'll say, every joke is a tiny revolution. And it's just, it does seem to be a strategy that's been out there and just that nobody's plucked or used before.
Yeah. I think part of that is it doesn't come naturally to the people who the Democrats have had atop their tickets. It's just not a Hillary Clinton thing, and it's not really a Joe Biden thing either.
Right.
And I think Harris just feels more naturally at home doing that.
Do you have a theory about why weird worked? It's such a casual, nothing word. So
yeah, I think it's a couple things. One, J.D. Vance says some things that are pretty weird. I think it just resonates because it feels accurate, and it resonates because it was coming from Tim Walz, who feels so much like your high school geography teacher. And so it feels like something, it doesn't feel calculated coming from him. It feels really genuine and like he's the right messenger for that.
Right.
So I think it's just, maybe that's it. I mean, I don't know. It's so simple. It seems like it ought to be, it's hard for me to believe that just a single word this simple has permeated so quickly. And I'm sure we'll get over it quickly, but like even this much.
But the way it permeated is fascinating because in my mind, the word weird, I do think of it like a series of literal dominoes. So you could have called J.D. Vance scary. Instead, they settled on weird. And weird is actually a way to reclaim the silent majority. Like it is a flip. It's like you're the weird ones. Like we're the regular ones. We're the majority. And then the campaign kind of builds on top of that little word and reclaims freedom. And then builds on top of that and reclaims patriotism. So this kind of dumb nothing word becomes the cornerstone of an entire strategy of like role reversals, you know?
Yeah. And it's also tied to them, Harris sort of trying to run as an insurgent against an incumbent, even though she is the vice president and he's not in office. All of these things tie together, totally.
Right. There's just a flip. Okay, now I want to talk a little bit about the dangers of this strategy. You and I both work at the Atlantic magazine. I would argue that the Atlantic magazine has been very invested in taking Trump's threat to the future of our democracy very seriously. And so there is a way in which minimizing the threatening aspects of it, makes it seem silly or like the person isn't really powerful. And it seems like there's some danger in that.
Yes, I think that totally is right. But I do think there's a danger of minimization. And, like you were saying, you saw them sort of trying to do this, like make the jokes and then kind of, but seriously, folks,
right?
This guy's going to tear down democracy. And that it's tough to make those things go together. I mean, I also have questions, I think, about whether it really will be effective over an extended period of time. And I think about Republicans in the 2016 primary trying to ridicule Trump and use that against him. And mostly they all flopped.
What do you mean? Can you give me an example?
Oh, yeah. So Marco Rubio made another sort of suggestive phallic remark talking about Trump, why Trump was so defensive about having small hands, and got a response from Trump, but it didn't really work for Rubio. He ended up looking sort of like a middle school kid trying to make a rude joke, and obviously he did not win the nomination.
I think it's the many against the one. I've thought about that too, because obviously this is not the first time anyone's, used their hands and made the Obama joke, but it has to be everybody. It's like that moment, that moment in the high school movie when, at first it's like one kid against the other kid and the bully always wins. But then suddenly the entire school comes up with the line and then the entire school all of a sudden represents like joy and goodness. And they're the ones singing on top of the desks and the sort of like the former bully is hiding under the desk. Like it can't be one-on-one. And that's what's the sort of amazement of this moment is how it coalesced and took form all at once.
Well, I think Trump has lost something too. He seems to have like lost some of his speed. So, I think Axios had a story a week or two ago about his failure to come up with a nickname for Harris and listed all of the things that he's tried and just none of them are taking. And it's hard for me to remember the last time he came up with a really good nickname, or at least a really catchy nickname. And so I think maybe Democrats sense some weakness and sense that he can be attacked in a way that he just can't defend as well as he once could. I also wonder if maybe we're used to him. He's not as novel, and that takes some of the power out of it.
Yeah, some of it is novelty. I mean, that's like cheesily poetic, like an O. Henry story, that like the metaphor is his inability to come up, like the last one was Communist Kamala, like his inability to come up with a nickname that sticks. That's the moment when he crumbles. So interesting. Yeah. Okay, back though to regular strategy. So here's another danger, just strategically, if you're running Kamala's campaign. If you're making fun of Trump, there's an implied audience to your message. Like you are signaling, I am speaking to people who make fun of Trump. That doesn't seem to be the people that she needs to be speaking to right now. Those people are already with her.
I don't know. I mean, I think that if it works, the kind of ridiculing strategy works because it actually reaches other people. I mean, the high-minded approach, I think, has reached all the people it can. If you think that democracy is under threat from Trump, you're probably already supporting Harris. So that's kind of a base play at this point in a weird way. But, if you're not sure, maybe you're one of these voters who voted for Trump once or twice, but maybe not all that, with a lot of enthusiasm. And then you were kind of appalled by January 6th. But you also, you haven't loved the Biden-Harris administration. If you make this guy seem small and weak and ridiculous, I think it can appeal to some of those people in the same way that, like, the schoolyard bully, by being undercut, suddenly loses his power over everyone. Like, once someone recognizes that he can be punctured, there's no one who can be bullied because they've seen that he just doesn't have the mojo anymore.
So you're a political reporter who's been covering Trump for a very long time. What do you imagine he's saying and doing now? We've had dribs and drabs from the campaign, but I wonder, where do you think he's at now? Because we've been talking about the strategy aimed at him, but I'm curious, and I know this is speculation, like, how is it landing on him?
Right. He tends to rage whenever he's down. He gets really upset, and I think even in his public pronouncements, we can see a little bit of this. Like, threatening to pull out of the debate is a gesture of frustration with the way things are going, frustration with the coverage. And, those things come and go. But I think the fact that those rumors are circulating is a sign of the kind of backbiting inside Trump headquarters that we remember well from previous campaigns, but hadn't seen until now.
This private raging and campaign chaos, it's not just a side effect of this kind of messaging, it's a strategy unto itself. And it's one that my next guest has spent years thinking about. George Conway's efforts to publicly mock Trump often get the results he's after. But he's also well aware of the risks.
There's a double-edged sword. Like, you want people to take the danger seriously, but at the same time, you want to make clear that he's a fool.
All that after the break. The best journalism does more than just give you information. It sets you up to learn, to think critically, seek out the truth with an open mind. This is what The Atlantic does. It teaches you to question yourself, seek out new perspectives, separate fact from fiction. Now, in this back-to-school season, for a limited time, you can get $20 off when you give someone an Atlantic gift subscription. Start them off on a lifetime of good learning at theatlantic.com/learning. George Conway is a well-known conservative lawyer. During the Trump administration, he was considered for jobs in the Justice Department, and his then-wife, Kellyanne Conway, was, of course, Trump's very visible advisor. But at some point, Conway started to sour on Trump, while his wife was still working for the president. And then one week, in March 2019, Conway tweeted a few things about Trump's mental stability, including a picture of the official definition of narcissistic personality disorder. Trump, who you could argue had other things to do, tweeted back that Conway was a stone-cold loser, the husband from hell.
Which is like, dude, why are you doing that? It's like, you should be ignoring me, right? Anybody in the White House would have told him, and I believe he was told, ignore Conway.
But he didn't. And Conway took Trump's inability to ignore him as proof that he was right. Because one of the hallmarks of narcissism is extreme sensitivity to criticism, an inability to ignore it.
Even if it's not constructive to respond to the criticism, even if it means that he's amplifying the criticism, and even if it means he is not talking about what he needs to be talking about either as president or as a candidate.
That year, Conway wrote a story for The Atlantic that said Trump's narcissism made him unfit for the presidency. And he decided he would do something to help make sure he wasn't reelected. Conway had an idea. a really specific out there idea, which came to him one day when he was listening to some strategists talk minutia about which campaign ads to run in which markets.
It occurred to me that all you needed to do to drive the guy nuts was to run ads on the cable providers of the White House.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I was in my office at 52nd and 6th in New York, and my friend Molly Jong Fast said, "Hey, I'm having lunch with Rick Wilson." And I said, "Oh, can I join you?" Because I wanted to meet Rick. I knew he was an ad guy. I knew he was an amazing troll of Trump, and he wrote a book about Trump. So we had lunch. It was like 3 p.m. at Quality Meats on 6th Avenue. And I told him my idea. And he was like, his eyes lit up because he understood immediately what it was. And we started talking about the kinds of things you could run as audience. We didn't call it audience of one ads, but basically that's what we were talking about. You don't have to run these ads all over the place. You don't have to run them in swing states. You could run ads that just drive him nuts by just basically running it in the White House.
So he tried it out. It was surprisingly easy.
What happened when we formed the Lincoln Project later is we took that idea and we started running ads in Mar-a-Lago. It cost like $5,000 for just one spot on, it was Tucker, I think it was, or Hannity, just to run it in a very, very narrow place.
That's amazing. And what were the ads? Like, what was the...
Well, the one ad that I remember he responded to was called Morning in America.
Mm-hmm.
MOURNING.
There's morning in America. Today, more than 60,000 Americans have died from a deadly virus Donald Trump ignored.
The ad was a contrast to the Morning in America ads, the positive messages that Reagan did in 1984, and except it was Morning in America, and it was like how terrible everybody's out of work because of COVID and Trump's an idiot. And Trump went out after watching that. I think he must have been watching it in the White House. It was on Fox News, and like the next day, he's at Andrews Air Base, about to get on Air Force One, and he starts yapping about the Lincoln Project to the media that they're and calling us a bunch of losers. And then, the next day, Lincoln Project gets $4 million in contributions or some figure like that. And it was like, that was the proof of concept.
Conway has kept it up over the years. More recently, he started the Anti-Psychopath PAC, which runs these quick-cut, troll-y kind of ads specifically about Trump's mental instability. There are a lot of mentions of Trump praising Hannibal Lecter, for example. They, too, are targeted at an audience of one, and the aim is to elicit a very specific cascade of reactions.
Trump is somebody who can be manipulated, but you cannot control him at the end of the day. And that's why it's just so important for people to keep hitting him with truthful descriptions of his behavior that conflict with his personal self-image, the image he wants to create. And it deeply wounds him. I mean, it deeply wounds him to the point where, he responds to it in a manner that instead of talking about economics in his speech, that he's supposed to be talking about economics, he's talking about who's weird and who's not weird, which is weird.
Look, so you've been doing this for a while. You've like road tested the strategy that the Democrats are now using. Were you surprised, starting from the weird moment and then going through the Democratic convention, how suddenly mocking the president was politically acceptable on a stage by very dignified people?
Yes and no. I mean, I think they finally get it, the Democrats. Mm-hmm. The way you win this election, I thought, is Trump has to become the issue. Mm-hmm. And once Biden stepped aside, Trump became the issue because he was the old guy in the race.
Right.
And the Democrats had a fresh face, and all of a sudden people were looking more at Trump. I'd like to think I had something to do with encouraging all of this, but I think they figured it out, and one way or the other. But it's something. I've been banging the drums on this for years, and it's sort of gratifying to see it finally happen. I mean, in 2020, I was tweeting that the Democrats should hire a team of psychological professionals to advise them how to get under Trump's skin. They didn't do it then. They don't have to do it now. It's not really. You don't really need shrinks to do this. You just need to basically. You make fun of the guy, and he gives you thousands of things to make fun of, from Hannibal Lecter to sharks to electrocution to injecting bleach to, the guy is endlessly, he's absurd. And pointing that out, I think you have to do it in a way that reminds people, though, he's dangerous.
Yeah, that's the subtext. So the text is kind of joke, mocking, trolling. The subtext is he's dangerous.
Right.
Got it. Okay.
But it reminds me of this. There's this Star Trek episode where the Enterprise is kind of held hostage by some incorporeal being, if that's the right word, and was basically causing, through its telepathy or whatever, causing the crew of the Enterprise to engage in conflict with one another. They're literally fighting each other in the hallways and the various decks of the starship.
Senseless violence, fighting, while an alien has total control over us.
And Kirk and Spock, or one of them, realizes that the way to defeat this evil being was to start laughing at it. And they started laughing at it, and all of a sudden the being shriveled away back into space.
That's
good. That's kind of like what Trump. It's kind of like the way Trump works.
Yeah, that's really good. Well, thank you so much for walking us through that. That is really interesting. I feel like you're a prototype for what we're now seeing on a big stage. So it's just interesting to hear about your experience.
Thanks for having me.
This episode was produced by Kevin Townsend and edited by Claudina Bade. It was engineered by Rob Smerciak and fact-checked by Sam Fentress. Claudina Bade is the executive producer of Atlantic Audio, and Andrea Valdez is our managing editor. I'm Hannah Rosen. Thank you for listening. Live long and prosper.